Hi, everyone. So, after a bit of a break, I have come back to looking at rums once again. And today, I have another Canadian rum in my collection that I want to let you know about. But there's a fair bit of backstory that I need to talk about with respect to the distillery itself. And as a consequence, I want you to bear with me while this part one talks about the distillery and the owners. And then in part two, I'm going to talk about this little baby, which we'll get to in a second, right? For the purposes of this thing, I just wanted to mention that you know that I don't really care that much for most of the Canadian rums out there, largely because they're made with such indifference that they might as well just be some 1970s Bacardi in a minis floating around on some, cheap hotel room or on a boat somewhere where you take in a cut-rate cruise. So for those who occasionally despair at ever finding a locally made rum that would blow your hair back and mow the pants off, well, I do have one for you here. The distillery that I'm talking about today is called Below the Salt Distillery, and has an office in Cape Breton, but it is actually made in Nova Scotia. And this particular rum that I've got here is actually not for commercial sale, but I'm going to use it to kind of like make the point that I want to, which is that these guys really know what they're doing. Now, this doesn't have a name. It's simply 74 or so percent straight off the still. It's unaged, completely white, and what you're getting is, well, something really quite interesting. Now, this is the distillery. This is a small distillery called, as I said, Below the Salt, that is run by, and I swear this is true, a tugboat captain named Greg Culp, whose business card, and I have it here, very appropriately gives his position as chief adept and bottle filler. And it gives you a flavor for the whole operation such as he has it. Now, Captain Culp, which is, you almost like to feel that it's coming off of a comic book or something like that, is indeed a tugboat captain for the Arctic Sea Lift. He's been involved in making one form of alcoholic beverage or other, legal or not, commercial or otherwise, since he was a pilchard brewing illicit beer in his backyard as a teenager. But he liked the subject, and he studied chemistry at university and then got his master's ticket and spent the next decades traveling around the Caribbean and other parts of the distilling world, which included interning for, I think, the better part of a year in Cognac, in a distillery there, for a very venerable maison whose name he didn't give me. And no, it's not the one that you're thinking of, because it sounded like fun and they were paying him and he wanted to know more about the entire process. He's really all about the process. And I mean, this guy really, really likes rum. Anyway, so after a few years, I mean, he's still in the shipping business, and he has a business that actually has an office here in Calgary, which is how I met him. And he decided that he wanted a retirement plan to kind of like monetize his passion and his hobby, something to ward off the chill, you might say, and make a few bucks. And after traveling around and consolidating his experience to augment that, what he already had done in a lifetime of globetrotting, he sourced a double retort pot still, and he and his partner, who's called Victoria Persig, a photographer, and she also has a card where she calls herself chief mate and the gal who makes the distill and almost everything look good. People, I just can't make this stuff up. Anyway, he set up shop as a small distillery in a landaway in Highway 4 in Nova Scotia, very close to the shoreline dividing it from Cape Breton. In point of fact, as a throwaway factoid, he was offered the opportunity many years ago to take over Vernon Walter's blacksmith shop. And this is the same place that eventually got taken over by Ironworks. And of course, they launched their eponymous distillery there. And it just goes to show that it's a really small world. Now, that sort of sense of humor that I describe here in the business cards and the naming of the company, of course, is represented this way and is very much a maritime kind of thing, which is probably why he and I get along so well. But while in today's world, just to give you some backgrounders on this part of it, salt is something of a commodity whose major use is actually not in tables and flavoring our food, but as a feedstock for industrial chemicals. For most of history, it really was a tradable good, much used for nutrition and preserving of food. Trade routes were opened to find new supplies, and as late as 1860, wars could still be fought over supplies. Now, in medieval times, it was a precious resource not often seen except at the tables of the rich, where small pots of the stuff were placed halfway down the table of a noble who had, the peons and everybody else for dinner. And the lords, ladies, and exalted ones, which is to say, not us, they sat above the salt, and it's a mark of their lofty station. And while us peasants, rabble, and assorted commoners and lowlifes, well, we sat below the salt, and therefore it's clear where the chief adepts' preferences and antecedents lie. Now, Calgary is not really known for its maritime waterways, but it was just a matter of time before Captain Cup sailed into my area, and he brought a bunch of bottles, and he's got a whole set of them. There's the, let me just see from my notes here very quickly. There's the rum line, there's the Lardois Jacques, which is this one. There's the Trois Capitaines, and each one has a story. Each one has that irreverent sense of humor on the label. The photography is done by Miss Perseg. It really is quite nice stuff. And the rum that he brought to kind of like introduce himself, if you will, was this one, which was kind of like just off the still, unaged kind of thing. But it kind of gives you a flavor for what he's trying to do. Now, just to give you some further information on the distillery, he actually has a completely organic sort of thing, solar power, recycling everything to make sure that the carbon footprint is either neutral or negative. I mean, it really is quite amazing. And it's not quite an agricole style operation he has, but it's close, because what he's doing is he's using unrefined Guatemalan and Demerara cane juice crystals, specifically not refined sugar, which is then rendered down into vesu or honey or whatever you want to call it, and then fermented for a few days. Now, the distillate coming off the pot still, remember, double retort pot still, is aged in some cases, but in this case, it's absolutely not. And I thought that I would kind of like just mention how good this thing is, because it's 74% on something that's costing. He is going to issue this commercially at some point, but perhaps not in the immediate future. Bloody hell. There is a lot of agricole in this. It's pointless giving you the tasting notes since you can't get it immediately, and by the time you do, it'll be some other batch or whatever. But there's a certain agricoleness to it, absolutely sure. There's salt, there's sweet, there's cucumbers, there's watermelons, tons and tons of sweet fruits like that. Also a bit of salt. It's got that sour kimchi, fermented cabbages kind of vibe to it as well. Herbs just coming out of its backside. I mean, this thing is really quite amazing, and I'm really glad that I got this, because it really is a very nice piece of work. Now, Captain Cook was a really huge proponent of minimizing barrel influence, which is one reason he gave me an unaged thing to see how the natural flavors pop out. And what he's interested in is making sure that the edge of the distillate is always maintained. It's not that he doesn't like Demerara's, for example. He just thinks that after 15, 18, 21 years or whatever, too much of what makes it distinctive as part of your terroir, you could possibly imagine, is then gone. But he redistills the lees in each run. He adds the flavor and bite, and he tries to minimize the aging process as much as he can. And even if it's something as simple as this one, it really is quite something. Now, he does have a website. Shipping is, so far as I'm aware, completely easy to do within Canada itself, and I can't recommend this stuff enough. I have talked about Romero Distillers here in Calgary before. Again, they adhere to much of the same philosophy. Cask strength for their sherry cask edition. Yes, they do age a bit more than he does. I think it was 3 to 4 years in their case. But the thing is, there are so few really good distilleries, and they are almost all micros that dare to go somewhere different, and they don't want to make some puling milquetoast vodka wannabe, that they deserve attention, because we are almost conditioned to always look for the next best thing from somewhere else. But there is enough within the country for us to actually say, you know what, this thing can go up against some of the Jamaicans or some of the Barbadians or Guyanese and still make a good showing for itself. And you know what? It actually reminds me of this distillery. That sort of insouciant sense of humor and desire to go completely batshit off the reservation that characterizes the UK rum makers and those little craft distilleries that I've talked about before, like John Go or Ninefold or these guys all over Scotland or whatever. They think the same way as Greg does, or Greg thinks the same way as they do. It's a upshot who came first and who wants to do it better, right? The thing is, it's a great little distillery. I can't recommend it enough. And in the next review, which I'm going to post right after this one, we're going to go into the Lardois Jacques, which has got an interesting little backstory of its own and is quite an interesting rum in its own right. I'm going to leave it there for now. This is just an introduction to the Below the Salt Distillery and its founder and chief distiller and chief mate, Greg Culp. And I do hope you enjoy this, and you will see some more photographs in the review that comes out to accompany it. Until that next review, take care, everybody. Bye-bye.